except we're going to live in a trashy house. So we give the environment some status too, some moral standing, and that's usually by groups that represent them. However, it's important to understand that not all moral principles apply the same. Nature does not have autonomy, the freedom to make up its own mind the way people do. Therefore, only people have full moral standing. Whatever this moral standing is going to be, only people have all of it. And this standing, in theory, should be equal for all people. So moral standing is our relationship with one another in an adversarial situation in case someone gets lazy and puts their elbow in my nose. Other than that, we live in harmony. You do what you want to do, I do what I want to do, no one's objecting. You don't want to A, don't study. You want to B? Did I share that in class the first day? There was a fellow who only wanted a B, had 87 going in the final. He only wanted a B. Go for it. I don't understand it, but if you want a B, you can have a B. And so within the framework of the social contract, you can do whatever you want to do as long as your elbows don't come in touch with anybody else's nose. The ideal picture is that we're all free to do anything we want to do, as long as we understand the nature of freedom. I am not allowed to violate your freedom. But when we do, we enter into this adversarial process, and that's what develops our moral standing. Suddenly it's called into question. My moral standing is not freedom without justification. I have to prove that my freedom, I did not cause the accident, so I can't be in jeopardy of it. Everybody understand those concepts? Okay, you're going to be tested on what the definition is, so I go through that and make a point of it. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Anybody remember a company called Century One? Did they have that way back then? If I have this one right, back in the day there was a cell phone company, and this is back in the day when you had, the portable phones you should plug in, and it looked like a telephone. And you could use it when you weren't by a landline, because what would happen then is a signal would be sent to a receiver, and the receiver was hooked up to a landline. And a landline telephone line is what we call two twisted pairs. They're 4 wires and they're twisted, and they give out a signal coming and going. So what they did then is they figured out they could take 2 of the pairs and hook them up, and they could give you service, microwave it across to another tower, and da-da-da-da-da. And you could then be in your car, even though you had to talk real slow because the speed of the transmission was this, but at least you could talk on the phone without being in a landline. Then, one day, they offered digital rather than analog. What they figured out is they could take the other 2 pairs they weren't using, and they could add those together and double your speed. So over here you have analog, and over here you have digital, and now they double your speed. So you talk a little faster, but not that much faster, but at least you're getting more bang for your buck. But the problem with these people is they put both these analog and digital receivers and transmitters on the same poles trying to save money. And what would happen is that the signals would cross out one another. Now, I have a computer business for 16 years. I'm making over 100 grand a year, and I'm doing business all over northern Michigan, which is rural, and this company is the only provider up north. And so I'm on the phone talking to Chicago to make a hello, 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 drop a signal. Talking to my people out in California trying, hello, hello, and this goes on and on. So how do you deal with it? I'm trying to explain the adversarial position to you. So what happened is every month I would go in, rather than use a credit card, I wanted a face-to-face. So every month I'd go in with a check made out to this company for the amount I was being charged. Now what they didn't know is I was keeping a little book in my car, and I would mark down, let's see, September 18th, and the time exactly that I was going in, and then I would walk in and someone's at the counter. I'd say, hi, my name's so-and-so, and you'd give me your name, and I would just write that in my memory because it had to go in the book. And I'd say, I need to pay my bill, and they do all the stuff and give me the receipt. And I said, by the way, I'm out there and my signals are dropping, I'm losing business. Oh, we know about it, we're working on it. So I go back out in the car and write it down. Next month, same thing. 6 months later, I'm on a call to Chicago, and I probably drop a call that loses me 30 grand. And I miffed. So I go into the phone company, and I said, I want to drop my service. And it happened to be a young lady, and she says, fine. She says, that'll be $200 early termination fee. And I said, is your boss here today? And she said, yes. I said, could I talk to your boss for a minute? So she got the boss. Turns out it's a guy. How can I help you? I said, I want to drop my service today. I'm dropping calls left and right. He said, no problem, just be $200 early termination fee. And I said, so here's the deal. I said, I know your computer. You know they do the computer. I said, you have a record, and I have a record. I've been going out to my car and writing everything down, so I have your names, I have the dates, I have the exact times, and I've been told you know there's a problem. And for 6 months now, you haven't fixed the problem, and I'm figuring I lost about 130 grand. So what I'm going to do is give you the money, because if you don't pay your bill, you void your contract. You have to understand the law, people. I said, and then I'm going to go to my lawyer and we're going to sue you for at least 130 grand and all the trouble you're putting me through. Because I have rights. You sign a contract with me to give me digital service and I'm not getting it. And he stared at me for a couple of seconds. He said, hang on a minute. And he turned around and he reached in this little cubby box and he takes out a sheet of paper and he says, fill this out. He said, and fax it to Minneapolis, Minnesota, and you won't have to pay the early termination fee. I never had to go to court. I won my battle through reason, because I understood the law and I understood what the adversarial position is. That's how important moral understanding is, people. Your moral standing when it comes to relationships with other people. I won't ask you to raise your hand, but there's a chance some of you are in moral jeopardy right now with entities out there that you've entered into contracts with, perhaps. And they've scared the daylights out of you, that you don't have any rights. You have to do this, you have to do that. So that's an example of moral standing. Now, we said moral standing applies to people. Well, the genesis of this problem is back in 1973. And we'll get to this in the coming weeks. There's a Supreme Court case called Roe versus Wade. This is a case of a lady, this is a pseudonym, a false name. She wanted to have an abortion in Texas, and Texas said she couldn't. It was against Texas law. So she sued the state. It went to the district court, and the district court said she had reason to sue. Well, the state objected. How do I do this? This is local courts, then it goes to state, and finally it goes to federal. And in between here, they have appellates where you can appeal it. The state can appeal it. You can appeal it. You go all the way up to the Supreme Court and see if you can get it settled. Because when they make a decision, it's settled for everybody across the country. Well, it finally makes its way up here. Unfortunately, it takes too much time. She ends up having a baby. She can't have a legal abortion in Texas at the time. And the Supreme Court looks at this and says, well, this is an interesting conundrum. I have a woman. That's obviously a person, and I have a critter inside her. And I'm wondering if the critter is a person or not. Now, don't forget, this is 1973. We're really flying blind. These days, if you go to Nat Geo, and you know what Nat Geo is? If you go to Nat Geo, these days, you can watch this. Last one I saw was a little female fetus. Here's a woman's womb, and here's her fallopian tube, and here's her ovary. And they can, I'm sure they use some kind of sedation, and we have these, it looks like a coaxial cable, but real thin, a little light on the end and a camera, and they will literally take you right up there and you watch the egg, you watch the ovary ovulate and the little egg pops out. And then you can literally see the little sperm swimming upstream, you know, and they get to the egg, Penny, 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 can I come in? And one of them comes in. And you literally watch this egg become fertilized. And then you watch it divide into 2, and then you watch it divide into 4 and 8 and 16 and 32 and 64. And it slowly makes its way down the fallopian tube about 2 weeks, drops into the womb, attaches to the wall. It goes from a blob of cells, suddenly starts taking shape. We change the name. Here it's a zygote, blastocyst, embryo, and then we call it a fetus. And we watch the development of this. We've never been able to see it before, not in 1973. So the court's flying blind, and it's trying to make a decision. What is a fetus anyway? We think it's cells. Is it just a blob of cells? Well, yeah, you're a blob of cells too. Billions of cells. But you've taken on a form that resembles everyone else in the room, and we call that humanity. And so they were in a conundrum. They didn't know what to decide. So they made a physiological definition. You could watch this on TV, you still go, they had these arguments, biologists come in, philosophers come in, trying to figure out what does it mean to be a person. And at the end of the whole discussion, they decided a person had to be self-aware, self-conscious, and rational. They say that's unique to humanity. Now, it really isn't. We know that animals can think and do other things, but back then, again, we're flying blind. And they gave you 3 exceptions. Newborns. We're not sure if newborns are self-aware, self-conscious, or rational, but it won't take too long before they come up to speed. We also know that there are newborns with genetic defects who will never have the opportunity to become self-aware, self-conscious, and rational, but without the defects they could. And we also want to include people who now have diminished capacity, Alzheimer's, ALS, Parkinson's disease. They were fully rational, self-aware, and self-conscious, and they've lost it because disease has deteriorated their capacities. So a non-moral definition, a physiological definition, is self-awareness, self-consciousness, being rational with the 3 exceptions: newborns, diminished capacity, and genetically defective newborns. People, we already said, have full moral standing. Does a fetus have full moral standing? And here the court was not clear what to do. And so they searched for precedent. Legal times, they try and look back at law and find precedents. And so they couldn't decide it for a while, And one day one of the Supreme Court judges says, I found it. And they said, really, where'd you find it? He says, well, in the 14th Amendment. And they said, what? He said, yeah, it's right there in the 4th Amendment. It says any person born in the United States is automatically a citizen of the United States and guaranteed the full protection of life, liberty, and property. And they said, what? He says, right there, it says any person born in the United States is They said, where are you getting this from? He says, slow down. Any person born. Now, the 14th Amendment has nothing to do with personhood. It has to do with citizenship and the protection of rights to life, liberty, and property. But it does say any person born. And because of that, the court decided you had to be born in order to legally be a person. And if you weren't born yet, you weren't entitled to full moral standing. Would make sense if you decide the 14th Amendment is about personhood, right? So here's a moral conundrum. Try this out. Again, I failed at art. Okay, so that's a pregnant woman. And by the 8th month, I should probably call it fetus. When the fetus is growing up, its head's up here, and the feet are down here. But then around the 8th month or so, it changes. It presents itself head first. Do you know why it does that? It does that because your skull is in 4 pieces, and it's in 4 pieces for a reason. You're born with a hole in your head, and the reason for that is that the head has to come through the birth canal. And those heads are larger than the birth canal. We wait for the woman to dilate and it expands, but it's still pretty big. So when nature decides it's time and we push that critter to get it out off nature has a plan. Nature says, well, wait a minute, that head's not solid, and and you end up coming out crowned. And then, of course, it goes back to normal and that fills in, but it's never filled in before it's born. So the woman is 1 week away from delivery.